Okay, we're going to start by discussing chapter 2, Book of Genesis, Adam versus Darwin. God with his creature versus Charles Darwin. Before, let's review what we discussed in chapter 1. First, we should know that the universe did not exist in its own, but was created. And God declared himself as the creator of the universe. God created the universe in stages or phases, what's known as days. A day is not 24 hours, but undefined period of time that can range from thousands to millions of years. And every day is not necessarily the same duration as the other day. Some days can be longer than the others. And keep in mind that the seventh day is still not over yet, it's still open. We're still living in the seventh day. We also should know that God created everything through the mind of God or Logos or Jesus Christ. God created the heaven and the angel in the first day or the first phase. God created light in the first phase, and God formed the sun in the fourth day. God blessed all his creature, the bird, the animal, and human. And man was the crown of the creation. Man had the authority over all the animals. That's what we learned from chapter 1 in the book of Genesis. In chapter 2, God formed man from dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostril the breath of life, and man became a living being. So now man has two components, one from the ground, one from the earth, and one from God. And that will explain the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. A spiritual person will be led by the spirit from God, while a materialistic person will be led by the earthly concern and business. We also read about the Garden of Eden, that was a true garden that has 4 rivers in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. And out of the ground, God made every tree grow that's pleasant to the sight and good for food. So every tree in this garden was pleasant to the sight and good for food, which means nothing was bad. Everything was appealing, everything was tasty, everything was delicious. And people usually wonder, did Adam have a job in the garden or was just relaxing and enjoying his time? Actually, the Bible tells us that God had gave Adam a job. And Adam basically was taking care of this big garden. So it says that God put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. Genesis 2:15. So Adam has a job, and that gives us the value of work. Since the beginning, God made clear to human that the value of work is very important, and your life actually is based on your achievement of works. Also in the Garden of Eden, we know about 2 trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life was basically a symbol of Jesus Christ. Whoever eat from this tree will live forever. While the tree of knowledge of good and evil will only introduce evil to the human mind, because Adam and Eve were created in God's image, they only know the good. When they start to eat from this tree, they start to have the knowledge of the evil, and that will destroy their life. God gave command and warning at the same time to Adam. He told him, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. Notice here the word, you shall surely die. There is no way you're not gonna skip this. You will die. Definitely you'll die. So let's talk about the type of this. There are at least 3 types of this that God meant by this statement. Physical, spiritual, and eternal. The physical basically is separation between the body and the soul. The spiritual is separation from God, to be alive but far away from God. Like what's mentioned in the book of Revelation to the bishop of the church of Sardis, you have a name that you are alive but you are dead. And the third type of this is the eternal death, which is separation from God forever with torture and pain. So once Adam sinned, he basically went through the spiritual death. He separated from God. And he ended up with the physical death, and he was destined for eternal death, with all the human race following him. Until Jesus came and made the redemption for us on the cross, that was the only way we can be saved from the eternal death. And everyone who sinned against God and violated God's command fall into the spiritual death. The physical death now actually doesn't have much importance since we think it's just a transitional period to the eternal life. Now God sensed that Adam needed a helper, and he wanted Adam also to feel that need. So he brought all the animals to Adam so he can give him a name. And Adam gave name to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not one found a helper comparable to him. So Adam started looking at all the creatures, they all come in pairs, they all look similar. But for Adam, there was no one look like him. And God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." And that's how Eve came to the picture. God put sleep on Adam, and out of his ribs, he brought Eve and brought her to Adam. And Adam was so happy to see her. And he said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." And we enact the same scenario in the wedding when we bring the husband and the wife before the altar and we ask the husband to take the wife from front to the altar, as if God is basically hand him the wife. We enact the same scenario as God brought Eve to Adam, the priest representing God bring the wife to her husband. In chapter 3, God punished Adam by this sentence: "For you dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Genesis 3:19. I'm going to talk about Adam fall into sin and God punishment in the next series. But I just want to mention in this statement, "For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." This became a basic dogma to all humans who live in the earth, from Father Adam till today, that God is the creator. Nobody doubt that. And God created human from dust. And everyone, when they die, they turn to dust. Later on, everyone will stand up for judgment before God, and those who did good, the righteous people, will have to go to heaven, and the evil one will end up into hell. This was the basic dogma in the human mind, in the human conscience, until the 19th century. So what happened in the 19th century? Charles Robert Darwin came to the picture with his theory of evolution. He called evolution theory by natural selection. And he published in a famous book known as On the Origin of the Species, 1859. That was the copy of the front page of his book, The Origin of the Species, Charles Darwin, London, 1859. The next session, we're going to talk in details about his theory. How did he reach out to his theory? Why we should accept it or why we should reject it. Before we talk about Darwin, let's talk about the life in general in Europe in the 1800s, because those factors all came in play when Darwin started to form his theory about evolution. So what happened in Europe in this time? There was a lot of political revolutions, industrial revolution. We're going to talk about medicine and surgery in this time, religious transformation, and the Church of England. This will give us a background about what culture Darwin grew up in, what happened in the world around him, and what motivated him to come up with his theory, and why the world around him first rejected, then start to accept it, and what helped him to grow and spread his theory. If you look at the political revolution, this actually was the age of revolution. There are so many revolution, political upheaval, social unrest happening across Europe. Start by unification of Italy. The Pope still keep his superiority over the Vatican. Separation of Austria and Hungary in 1867. Crimean War in 1853 till 1856. Revolution across Europe, 1848. Triumph of nationality. Unification of Germany. Then a series of independence in different countries. Greece started early in 1821, then Belgium 1830, then Serbian autonomy by 1883. So it was a time of change, time of revolution, replacing government by another government, replacing a system by another system. It was a time of a change. And that change didn't stop at the political level, it went through to the industrial life as well. So there was a big wave of industrial revolution from 1820 till 1840 that led to growth of individual income. More people moved from small rural areas to live in big city, and that resulted in expansion of the cities. However, there was a presence of social strains, and that led to the rise up of a new middle class who reject the old traditional religious and teaching and politics. A new class who wanna start their own belief, who wanna deny all the old teaching or doctrine by the church and by the popes and by the scholar of the church. If we look at medicine and surgery in the 1800s, actually, it was not that far advanced. It was still in the early steps of development. So in terms of academic science, they know some about anatomy and histology, and that's it. They start to understand there is a small living microorganism that can somehow enter into the human body and cause sickness within the human being, and start focus on bacteria and parasites. There was so common and debilitating disease in this time, like tuberculosis, influenza, whooping cough, and cholera, and this take away thousands and thousands of life. Medical intervention was so limited. Stethoscope in the early 1800s and the late 1800s was the X-ray machine discovered. The type of surgery was basically amputation, especially during war times. However, some medical indication of surgery came around the 1735 by Claudius Eminent. He started doing appendectomy. In 1844, they started using nitrous oxide for anesthesia. Dr. Ludwig in 1880 did his first thyroidectomy. In 1883, Dr. Lawson Tate performed his first salpingectomy. In 1890, Dr. Glock pioneered knee replacement surgery. So as you see, most of the surgery was basically simple: appendectomy, salpingectomy, thyroidectomy, and a little bit of advancement by the end of the 1800s with a knee replacement surgery. If you want to have a good idea about health and medicine in the 1800s, you should look at the mortality rate. Unfortunately, there is no documentation except for the maternal mortality rate, which was accounted almost 5 per 1,000 live births. So for every 1,000 newborn babies, 5 moms died. The main cause of this at this time in Europe were basically infection: TB, dysentery or diarrhea, cholera, malaria, typhoid fever, pneumonia, diphtheria. So as you see here, there was lack of antibiotics. By the end of the 1800s, they will discover the penicillin. But before that, all this infectious disease could be easily treated with antibiotic if they were discovered. Next, we're going to talk about religious transformation. The 1800s actually witnessed so much change in the religious life. There was a rise up of a movement called Modernist movement. And those people who grow to reject the traditional interpretation of the Bible and the practice of the Catholic Church. There was a Reformation movement, including Methodist, Quaker, and Baptist, spread across Europe. Rise up of Unitarians and Universalists who reject the Nicene and Chalcedonian Creed. So basically, we have this new middle class who want to have their own doctrine, who want to come up with new interpretation, reject the old teaching, reject the old creeds, and want to make their own belief. If we focus on the Church of England, where Charles was born, there are important figures we have to talk about briefly. The first was King Henry VIII in 1534. He separated the English Church from Rome. In 1620, King James I came and translated the Bible to his own known version, King James Version. 1800, the Church of England united with the Church of Ireland and formed one big, large Protestant Episcopal Church, known as the United Church of England and Ireland. Then there was a big change from Catholicism to Protestant, that led by Edmund Seymour, 1547, Queen Elizabeth I. 17th century was the establishment of the First Baptist Church. Quaker movement came to life in 1660. John Wesley founded the Methodist Church in 1739. Salvation Army was formed to help the poor and needy in 1878. And the number of worshippers who regularly attend Sunday school service and worship were markedly declined. It was estimated almost one-third of population in England attend church on Sunday. That tells us that the majority of people living in England were not religious by any means. So we get an overall review of Europe in the 1800s. It's time of change and rebellion, change of government, change of politics, and rebellion against all the old teaching and all the standards that had been received from the church father. Political turmoil everywhere, division of the Ottoman Empire and separation of state, wars and social instability, industrial revolution and rise up of new generation who rejects the old church doctrine, division within the Church of England itself, and emergence of a new movement like Puritan, Quaker, and Unitarians. We'll talk a little bit about the Unitarian Church in England because Charles' father and his wife were members with this church. He himself introduced himself as agonist, but his close family member were Unitarian. Basically, the Unitarian Church, they deny the Holy Trinity. They deny the main church council, like Nicene and Chalcedon, and they have a different interpretation of the Bible. If we talk about Charles Darwin, start about his life first, from February 1809 till April 1882. He actually was the second son of a society doctor named as Robert Waring Darwin and Susanna Wedgwood. His father was a physician. Grandfather also was a physician. His name is Erasmus, and he was a free thinker. Free thinker basically is another term for liberal. So he came from a family of physicians who were liberal thinking. Darwin's mother died when he was young, around 8, and he was cared for by his 3 older sisters. His education, his father wanted him to grow up in the same family and be a physician. He sent him to Edinburgh University to study medicine. However, he hated anatomy and surgery, and instead he started to have interest in other areas. He focused on chemistry of cooling rocks on Earth, how to classify plant by modern natural system, how to stuff bird by John Edmund Stone, who was a freed South American slave. So you see a big change in his mentality and the way of thinking from medicine and treating patient into geology, into birds, into rocks, into plants. And this was the area where he's going to focus most of his research and his life. Edinburgh University actually was an eye-opening experience to Charles. He actually had the first interaction with open atheists, or what they call themselves a free thinker. At Edinburgh University, they have student societies, and he met with those free thinkers who start denying the divine design of human facial anatomy, and they start arguing that animals share all the mental qualities with human. And you notice this basically what Charles Darwin theory is about. He denies the presence of God, the role of God in creation, and he make man very equal with human. He make man as a descendant of animals. So that basically his experience in Edinburgh was the most influential in his theory of revolution. His father realized that his son started to decline and not doing so well in his school, so he switched him to a Christian school known as Christ College in Cambridge, and he graduated in 1831 with Bachelor of Arts degree. He made his famous trip on a rebuilt brig known as HMS Beagle with Robert Fitzroy, and start from Europe, basically from England, went all the way to South America, came across South America, then to the Galapagos Island, Pacific Ocean, came to the border of Australia, to the south part of Africa, then touched back again on South America and back to England. This was a famous trip, 1831 till 1836. Not talk about the specimen that he collected or the bird or the animal that he studied at this time, and I keep that to the next session, but I'm going to talk about his experience as a human being. Imagine 22 young, wealthy, naturalist, young boy coming from a country when he was treated with respect and peaceful country, coming to South America where the lots of revolutions. So in 1832, in July of 1832, he landed in the capital of Uruguay, known as River Plate. There was a state of rebellion, and he had to join the armed sailor to retake part of the rebel-held fort. So now the young boy start to be part of the militia and start to be part of the revolution, not just studying it, but be part of it. Went south more to Argentina, to Bahia Blanca, he started witness a genocide of the native Indian by the hand of General Jose Manuel de Rosa. So now he started to realize that the importance of power in controlling people, and some people might end up completely killed and destroyed and vanishing because there is a mightier, stronger power that take authority in this country. All this helped Darwin to reshape his theory about evolution. As you can see now from our study about the culture of Europe, about the changes that happening at all levels, that the theory already was there in his mind. He just made it true through some study of some fossil and birds. This was his stop in Montevideo, in Uruguay, then at Argentina, later on to Galapagos Island. So now put all the facts together that helped Charles form his theory. We found a young, motivated man. He want to make a name for himself in the world of science. So you want to come with something stark, something new. Had no solid background in biology, which make him jump into conclusion rapidly without taking time, without doing rigorous study, without comparing study with other scholars in his field. He had a special interest in bird and plant and geology, which basically what he focused on to come up with his theory about human development. It's interesting that someone studied bird and plant and earth, make a theory about humans. I assume you should study the humans to make a theory about human, not the bird and plant. He had early exposure when he was young in college to atheistic ideology, who basically deny God's rule in creation and believed that animals and humans share the same trait. He himself was agnostic, which means he was atheist. He denies the presence of God or the rule of God in our life. And he started to realize the human brutality and the dominance of the powerful. The mighty and the powerful will take control, and the poor and the weak will get extinct. And he went through different countries. Some were rich, some were poor, some were land, some were island, and that gave him an idea about sometimes there are some areas where they've been lacking food or go into starvation and go into death. And you see part of his major theory is competition for natural resources. When Darwin came up with his theory, he was met with a lot of opposition from so many people. Many scientists reject his theory, and he started to promote it by using the term survival of the fittest. Unfortunately, this was a time of industrial movement in Europe, and a lot of high rich people start using Darwin's theory to justify their ideas, like imperialism, labor abuse, poverty, racism, and social inequality. I'm going to end up with Darwin's death. He died on April 19, 1882 at age 73. He was diagnosed with angina, or was known as coronary heart disease at his time. However, a more detailed research turned out you could have other diseases would have similar symptoms. You could have a chronic complication of chronic Scheider disease, that is disease transmitted by a bite of a special bug known as the kissing bug or Trypanosoma cruzi in his trip to Argentina. Some people might claim he actually has systemic lactose intolerance, which is a systemic disease to some genetic abnormalities. And the evidence is that his symptoms markedly improved when he started to decrease the amount of milk in his daily food. Some claim that actually it was an H. pylori infection or was known as stomach bug. Anyhow, he died at 73 years old in England, and he was buried at Westminster Abbey, very close to Isaac Newton, the famous scientist. I hope in this quick review, I give you an idea about the changes that happened in Europe, the political upheaval, the revolutions, and Darwin background. And as we can see, the theory of evolution that came up was already in his mind, was already the talk of the free thinker in his time, from the student of Edinburgh University to the average person around him. He just formulated, and he tried to use some scientific evidence from studying birds and animals to prove his theory. The next session, we're going to go in details in his theory, what's his major part, and how we reject his theory, what other means or method to explain Darwin theory. Thank you for attendance, and I'll see you next week in another session of the whole Bible series.